We had an ideological screening test. The time is overdue to develop a new screening test. Those who do not believe in our Constitution or who support bigotry and hatred will not be admitted for immigration. We will have to temporarily suspend immigration from some of the most dangerous and volatile regions of the world that have a history of exporting terrorism.
That was Donald Trump earlier today outlining his immigration policy. He emphasized that a Trump administration will implement a, quote, extreme vetting process and establish a commission dedicated to combating radical Islam. So what are the constitutional ramifications regarding this proposal? Joining me now, Rabbi Brad Hirschfeld and Mark Meckler. Mark, let me start with you. On the constitutional side, the things that we talked about in our first segment and fighting the Cold War, do you see parallels, and would you see any sort of pushback on this?
There are parallels, and I think we would get pushback from the radical left. But look, we've had these sorts of things in our laws and in our society literally since the founding. The founders had these sorts of tests and believed that people of certain ideologies shouldn't be allowed in the country. We have statutorily in this country via Congress things like anarchists aren't allowed into the country, communists not allowed into the country. So we've been doing this all along. Nazis weren't allowed into the country during World War II. We have a long history of this being our front line of defense. This started to be challenged, by the way, by radical liberals like Barney Frank and the ACLU in the 1980s, late 70s, early 1980s. They pushed back on that front line of defense, and it's high time that a president led the way to reinstituting that line of defense.
Brad Hirschfeld?
Well, I think what's interesting is, like many things that Donald Trump says, there's a kernel of insight, but it's wrapped in a thick husk of misstatements of the truth and possible illegality. Now, Mark is right. We have had litmus tests, and we, in fact, still do have litmus tests. So that's the first thing people should be clear about.
What part of it don't you like, Brad?
The part of it I don't like about it is that all the other examples Mark gave are politically driven. The communists were housed, right, primarily by the Soviet Union. It was a state actor. These are not state actors. This is a religion-based test. And the idea that we would use a religion-based test is clearly illegal. Also, the fact is we do have vetting. It needs to be better, and the American public is entitled to the most rigorous vetting we can do. But it has to be done in a way that's coherent and testable.
Would you agree to commonality, though, whether it's Nazi Germany or radical Islam, is that they both wanted to kill us?
Oh, there's no question that we have a very serious problem. The issue is how to beef it up in a way that is actually respectful of the very constitutional principles we need to defend, that is respectful of the best of this country that we need to defend against real enemies. One of the challenges in that talk, he said, well, you can't always pick your friends, but you can recognize your enemies. The truth of the matter is that consistently the theory of the enemy of my enemy becomes my friend bears really bitter fruit for people who practice it.
So, Mark, you heard Rabbi Hirschfeld. Would you say that this is the sort of PC language that made us vulnerable in the first place?
Well, you know, I wouldn't go that far, and I think there's a lot of common ground between the rabbi and I. And where we might differ is when we're talking about radical Islam, when we're talking about people who support the imposition of Sharia law. Sharia law is completely inconsistent with the American Constitution. That's not about religion. That's a political ideology, and somebody who calls Islam simply a religion misunderstands the fundamental nature of Islam, which is Islam controls every aspect of society. It requires complete submission from its adherents, including political submission. It is absolutely, in every place it's practiced, where there's a theocracy, it is a political ideology, and we have the right to keep people who believe in that ideology out of our country. Not only the right, but the moral obligation to protect our own citizens, protect our Constitution, and protect the country.
Right.
Well, there's no question. There is a political version of Islam. There's also a political version of Christianity, and there's a political version of Judaism. In fact, every great tradition, certainly every great Western tradition, can be politicized. It turns out the most vicious and pernicious forms right now are coming from one tradition called Islam. But the irony is, in arguing for religious freedom, in arguing for gay rights, Mr. Trump actually may have to subject to test for some of his own followers in the name of Christianity actually oppose the full inclusion of gay people. Right or wrong, I'm not here to judge, but it's a funny thing. If we're really going to defend genuine religious freedom, we have to do it at home and abroad, not just vis-a-vis one particular group.
All right, guys, I wish I could go on, but we're running out of time here. Thanks a lot, Mark. You were fantastic. I want to get back on this a little later.
What Article 5 gives us is the ability to change the narrative and to ask people the question, should you decide or should Washington, D.C. decide? And I can tell you, I ask that question all over the country, and when I ask it of people on the left or people on the right, I get the same answer. They want to decide in their own community. They don't like Washington, D.C. deciding. To me, that's really what Article 5 is all about.